All right. This is my February 2024 book review. I ended up reading 12 books this month, but it was a lot more pages. I'll put up a graph from Storygraph. I read a lot of pages this month just because a lot of the books that I ended up reading were really big. So we started off by finishing. I read the first Mistborn book last month, but I finished the Mistborn series. It was amazing. This was my first foray into, as you can tell by my tabs, I had a blast reading this. This is my first foray into Brandon Sanderson, and I absolutely loved it. His writing, he's just very good at writing stuff that's easy to read and quick to read, and it just makes sense. I'll get to this later, but I am reading the Stormlight Archives now, and I think it just really carries through. Like, so much of the writing is just so easy to understand. I don't really know what to say about this series. It like pretty much just completely altered my brain chemistry. I think about Ellen and Vin, they're like the power romance couple in this book, like on a daily basis. If you don't know what Mistborn is, it takes place in this world where people can ingest metals and then burn them to do certain magical effects. And only certain people can do these. They're called allomancers. But then there's a certain subgroup of allomancers called Mistborn who can burn all of the different types of metals. Normally, allomancers can burn just one metal. So I forget what all the names of them are, but if you burn tin, that means you can like see things. It enhances your senses. You can see really far, smell very far, hear really far, that sort of stuff. There's people who can like influence emotions. They can make you feel things really strongly or like dull down what emotions you're feeling, stuff like that. And then these Mistborns, they can move metals. So they can pull metals towards them and push metals away from them, and almost kind of like bending from like Avatar, but it was super cool and I loved it. The story follows Vin, who starts off as like this just abandoned urchin. She's on the streets trying to survive, and she kind of knows has magic powers, but she doesn't really know how to use them or what they are or anything about them. The magic powers are kind of like for the rich people, so she's like, well, I'm just this street urchin. There's no way that I have these magic powers. But Kelsier teaches her how to use her powers, and it turns into this like kind of heist thing where they're trying to overthrow the government, and it's super cool and really intense, and all the characters are great, and all the characters just get so much better throughout the series. The world building is just insane. I absolutely loved it. The second and third book, so Well of Ascension and Hero of Ages, they're definitely a lot slower than the first book, and although they look they look like they're smaller because this is the first one, but this one's actually only like 650. These ones are both over 750 pages, so it's an illusion. These books are way heavier. They're dense books, but I really didn't mind that they were slower. I think the action is probably the weakest point of the books, to be honest. There's a lot of capital P push, capital P pull, and it's like, am I really feeling this? I don't know. I think in all books I read, the action scenes, I kind of just skim to get the idea of who's winning. I don't really care about the details, so that was not the highlight for me. Highlight was there was a lot of political drama and kind of like, well, now that we've accomplished our goal, what's the next step? How do we set up a government? And as a political science student, like trying to figure out how do you set up a democracy if you've never seen one successfully been done. So I don't know, a lot of really interesting stuff going on. I ate up every second of it. I still think about it on a daily basis. Ellen and Vin have my heart, and I cry all the time thinking about these books. And I read these at the beginning of the month. It's been over a month since I've read them, and I still think about them. So highly, highly, highly recommend. I gave the first two books 5 stars, and then I gave the last book 6 stars. I think my only 6-star read this month. So the whole series as a whole, I gave 6 stars because, yeah, I just absolutely loved it. The next book I read was Pandora's Star. This was a recommendation from my dad. He read it and he really liked it, and it has amazing world building. And that's about all that it had going for it. I didn't really care much for the story or the characters. So try to give a synopsis of this book. There is so much going on. This is a dense book, and there's tons of characters, and they're all doing different things, and eventually the plots kind of converge. But for most of this book, this is the first book, there's a second one. They're kind of just doing their own thing as the plot is kind of progressing in the background. So the year is 2380. It takes place in the future. And human civilization, I don't know exactly. Oh, it says 600 here. I'll just use the back of the book. So there's 600 planets that humans have colonized in their expansion of the universe. So basically, wormhole technology has been invented, and they use that to like teleport to all these different planets, and that's like no one really uses spaceships anymore. They just use these wormholes to travel to places using trains and stuff. It's kind of cool. I mean, very cool. The world building is really good. One day, this astronomer, he sees a star just like instantly go out. He's like, that's kind of funny. So then he goes and like investigates it a little more, and he finds out that there was some kind of barrier put in place around this star like 3,000 light years away, and they don't really know why. So the whole plot is kind of trying to figure out why this barrier was put up, and what steps should be taken. Humans have found sentient life, but it's all been friendly, so they've never had any experience with like an aggressive alien species. And it kind of seems like this barrier was put in place to try to either keep something from going in or to keep something from coming out of the solar system. So it's kind of like, why is this put in place? So there's like a million other subplots in here. There's like a mystery subplot. There's like a fantasy adventure subplot. This book's trying to do a lot. But that's kind of the general gist, is this solar system force field thing. I think a lot of the characters were pretty one-dimensional. Outside of Ozzy, who is one of the many, I would say probably one of the least used characters out of the main cast, but he was pretty well written. He had a lot of character growth, where I feel like all the other characters didn't really grow. They kind of stayed exactly how they were from the beginning to the end. And maybe that'll change in the second book, but I haven't read that yet. I read 1,000 pages of the first book and didn't feel like anything character-wise was really happening. It's very, very, very plot-driven book, which is okay, but I just feel like you have to have some character stuff going on. Yeah, there's a lot of setup for payoff that doesn't come for 500 pages. So when you're reading this very boring thing, it's kind of like, I know this is going to pay off. And they did all pay off well. Like, nothing was ever wasted, but it just felt wasted in the moment because I was spending 200 pages reading about something that won't matter for 600 more pages. And I kind of got bored with it. The author has a tendency to over-explain things, like I'm an idiot or that I forgot. I guess I read it over the course of like less than a week, so I didn't really forget anything, but I suppose some people would maybe take months to read this because it's a lot of words. If you can tell, the font is very small. So the author has a tendency to over-explain things, and I think the best example of this is there's tons of times where vehicles are described in excruciating detail. The number of axles, the type of engine, the sounds that the engine makes. And to some degree that is immersive, but when all the character can think about when they're driving next to a train is what kind of engine is in the train, it's like, okay, maybe the character cares, but I don't. And I don't need to just hear you describe a bunch of different types of train engines to me. That isn't interesting. Like, there's so much cool world building, but the train engines is not interesting world building to me. Anyway, sorry, that was like a big pet peeve of mine. So many times talked about the engines in vehicles. I just kind of skipped over them, which is fine, but it's just like, why even put them in there in the first place? My favorite character was Ozzy. Like I said, he is very flawed. He's got an afro, and he's like kind of like this chill businessman. But he goes on this quest to try to investigate the one sentient species that humans have discovered. What are they called again? They're called the Sylphin. And they're able to travel between planets using like the Sylphin path. So he's trying to investigate this and figure out what the Sylphin are all about. What is the Sylphin path? And on his way, he finds like this little orphan boy and takes him under his wing. And they go on this quest together, and they meet all kinds of cool aliens and all these different planets. And it was super interesting. And it's basically a survival story. They're trying to find food and shelter and escape these like deadly planets that have like ridiculously cold temperatures and ridiculously hot temperatures, and it was very, very interesting. And if the whole book would have been that, I would have loved it. There's a lot of really, like, in a vacuum, a lot of these scenes are extremely interesting. The aliens that they discover, you don't really find much out about them until the last half of the book, but they're a very unique way of doing your enemy, your alien. There's a lot of stuff that worked. It just didn't work together. I don't know, pacing was, I don't know exactly what it was. Something about this book didn't click. So I ended up giving it 1 star for Ozzy's story and another star for the world building. So I gave it 2 stars total, just because I really liked the world building. And I think if this would have been better executed, I could have really liked it. Next, Bloodmarked. This is the sequel to Legendborn, which I didn't bring with, but Legendborn is like this Knights of the Round Table kind of thing. Bree, she is the main character. She gets sent to this like advanced college program at 16. Her mother had died just a few months before, and she's trying to investigate what happened to her mother. And she finds this like kind of secret Knights of the Round Table organization where all the descendants of Arthur and his knights are like living there and like cosplaying as knights. There's magic, there's Merlin descendants. It's very interesting. And basically she thinks that this group is involved in her mother's death, and she's trying to figure out how they're involved, what they did, and exactly what happened to her mom. So this is the sequel to that. It picks up like pretty much exactly right where the last book left off. It wasn't as good as Legendborn, which was a 6-star read for me, but it was still really, really good. I read it in just one sitting, and I got the pretty Barnes & Noble copy with the sprayed edges, and yeah, I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. There wasn't enough Nick in it. If you know, you know. I know a lot of people ship her with Sal, but I'm sorry, Nick all the way, Nick all the way. What's so unique about this story is that it deals a lot with Black oppression and the effects of slavery on the modern Black population, and kind of whitewashing of history, and just a lot of really interesting topics that you don't really see explored in like a fantasy novel much. I mean, it is a modern fantasy, but it's still, I don't know, it was just really interesting. I really like what the author did by weaving kind of history, Black history, in with this like medieval Arthur's Knights thing and magic, and it's very good. I like it a lot. 5 stars. Definitely read it. Even though it's not as good as the first book, it's still like amazing. So, I mean, the first book was like, it's the high bar to try to meet that again. And it got close. So, for Valentine's week, I decided to read a whole bunch of romance novels. I ended up reading 3. So, I started off with Check and Mate. I never read Ellie Hazelwood before, and she just seemed like something I would like because she's like an ex-fan fiction writer, and I used to eat that shit up in middle school, so I ate this up too. It was really good. I read Bride as well, but I will be picking up more Ellie Hazelwood in the future. This follows, I think her name is Mallory. Yep, Mallory, who she used to be a chess prodigy, but then kind of something happened with her dad, and she stopped playing. But her best friend talks her into playing this charity chess match, and because it's a rom-com, she ends up playing the best chess player in the world, like the world grandmaster named Nolan, and she ends up winning, and it turns into like this huge thing, and everyone's filming it, and like, oh my god, who is this girl? She came out of nowhere and beat the grandmaster, and it just follows her story as she gets back into chess, and she keeps through chance at all these different tournaments meeting up with Nolan, and they fall in love, and it's very cute, and I like the story a lot. I gave it 4 stars. It's nothing absolutely, unique, but this, I really like boy falls first and falls harder kind of things, which this definitely is, and lots of pop culture references that normally I would think would be really cringy, but Allie really pulls them off, and I think they're really funny, and they just, I don't know, made the book really relatable. Next is Bride. This book completely changed the way that I think about romances. It was really silly, and you can't take it too seriously, but it was also really cute. And I really like the main male and love interest, Lo. So this is kind of like an Omegaverse light, if you want to call it that. Like, it doesn't have all the Omegaverse stuff in it, but it's like a good introduction to it if you haven't been exposed to that before. It's in this world, there's wares, vampires with a Y, and then humans. So there's like the 3 factions, and they're basically like always feuding, especially like the wares and the vampires. So in order to try to calm these tensions down, Misery Lark, who is the daughter of the lead vampire, so she's basically like a vampire princess. She set up in an arranged marriage with the werewolf Alpha, Lo. It's set in a modern day, so there's like cars and phones, and because it's Ellie Hazelwood, the main girl is like a IT technician or programmer or something. And then the other plot going on with this, that's not just the romance plot, is Misery's best friend disappeared a few months ago. She's a human, and they're trying to figure out what happened, and there was some sort of clue that her friend left that kind of made her suspect that the Wares and Lo were behind it. So she kind of agrees to this arranged marriage in order to get closer to Lo and try to figure out exactly what happened to her friend. So I gave it 4 stars. It was a really cute romance. I really liked it. Even more so made me want to read more Allie Hazelwood. So I will definitely be reading like Love Theoretically and The Love Hypothesis and that sort of stuff. The last romance book I read was You Again. This is a modern gender-swapped retelling of When Harry Met Sally. So the 2 main characters find out that they're both sleeping with the same girl, and that's who they meet. And then over the course of the next 9 years, they slowly have these like chance interactions and slowly become friends and then lovers, and it just felt really realistic. Kind of basically rivals to Lovers, but it just felt so believable, so realistic. All the characters, their actions, they were flawed human beings, so they didn't always make the right choice, but it felt like a realistic choice. There was no stupid miscommunication trope or anything like that. Like everything just felt really believable, really real, and really relatable. So I ended up giving it 5 stars. This was definitely my favorite out of the romance books I read. One of my favorite, probably of this month. I really, really liked it. It was really cute, really sweet. And the main characters, they were really in love. They were really in love. Next, I ended up reading Babel. It's just sort of like a fantasy, dark academia style book by R.F. Kuang. Definitely one of the most important reads I've had this year. Very profound, very thought-provoking. Such an amazing world, such amazing magic system. It is just so cool. It's beautifully written. The prose that R.F. Kuang uses, I haven't read her other work, so I would have to compare to like Poppy War and Yellowface to know, but it feels like it perfectly fits the world that this is taking place in. It's like the perfect style of writing. I just absolutely love it. So basically the magic system uses inscriptions on these metal bars. So you write the English word on one side and then another language on the other side. So let's say Chinese. And if those words basically mean the same thing, but there's like some sort of element that's lost in translation, that element that's lost manifests itself in like this magic power. So the magic effect is like the nuance that gets lost in translation. Such a cool magic system. I've never heard of anything like this before. So the story follows Robin, who is an orphan from China, who gets brought to London to attend this like fictionalized version of Oxford. At this college, Robin trains with a bunch of other foreigners to work at Babel, which is like this translation subsect of Oxford, to document different languages and make spells that are used to benefit Europe. Basically, how the magic system works is by using languages that they haven't used a lot of. So foreign languages, so like Chinese, Indian, Cantonese, that sort of stuff, the spell's power is more effective. So this book deals a lot with like colonialism and colonial powers and exploitation of nations and like stealings of culture, and it has so many important messages in it. I think anyone that likes fantasy should definitely read this, just because you get these super important messages told to you through a vessel that's really a really easy pill to swallow, if that makes sense. It's definitely slow to get into at first. It took the first third, I wasn't even sure if I liked it, but it also requires a lot of thought. Like those romance books I read, I could just half fall asleep while I'm reading them, and I can still understand what the book's trying to tell me. But this one, you have to be awake, you have to be paying attention. I did make a couple notes to try to help myself understand it, because it's not an easy book, but it absolutely is worth the act of participation, because the story is just so amazing and so impactful and so important and so heartbreaking. Definitely worth a read if you like linguistics and the theory behind different languages and fantasy novels, or any of R.F. Kuang's previous work. It's just, yeah, it's a really beautiful book. Next, I ended up reading Song of Achilles. I know this was like a popular TikTok book for a while. I hadn't read it before. People had recommended Circe to me, which is by the same author, Madeline Miller, but I hadn't really heard outside of TikTok anyone really talk about this in school. And I'm guessing it's because of the demographic at my school. They probably weren't super into the relationships in this book. It is basically a Greek retelling of the story of Achilles, but it's told from the perspective of Achilles' lover. The writing is just beautiful and really emotional, and Madeline just has this amazing way to convey incredibly detailed descriptions in just like 2 sentences. It's mind-blowing how easily she does that. I can perfectly picture every single scene in this book, and she spends half a paragraph only describing these scenes. It's kind of ridiculous, but I really love the story. I don't really know much about Greek mythology outside of kind of the basics, so I kind of vaguely knew the story, but I didn't know a lot of the details. And I think a lot of the stories are kind of stereotypical, exaggerated, one-note characters, but I think it helps convey the message really well. And nothing was to the point of being annoying or unbelievable or anything like that. I really enjoyed the book. 5 stars. Definitely read it. Next, I read Murder at Minnesota Point. This is a local book. I'm from Minnesota, so it's kind of a local book. My mom got it for me for Christmas. I got it signed. It's okay. I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. It's a true story about a murder that took place in the late 1800s in Duluth. It's basically the series of events that lead from an unidentified body washing up on the shores of Lake Superior to catching the killers, half a country away 2 years later. It was interesting enough to hold my attention. I mean, I finished it in one sitting. It is an unbelievably short book, and there's a ton of pictures in it, which makes it go by really fast. I find true crime really interesting. I've always loved BuzzFeed Unsolved and Mystery Files and all of that stuff. So I liked it enough, and then the fact that it was local and I knew a lot of the locations they were talking about just made it a little more interesting, an extra little cherry on top. I gave it 2.5 stars. Definitely worth a read if you're into true crime and you like Minnesota. Otherwise, I would say you could probably skip it. Next, this is a big one. I read Way of Kings, Brandon Sanderson, first Stormlight Archive book. I finally started Stormlight. I'm working through the 2nd book now. I'll probably finish it today. The world building is just absolutely amazing. All the characters are so relatable, so lovable. They all have a little piece in my heart. It definitely has where I think a lot of fantasy books have, where at the beginning and you're learning about the magic system, it's kind of like a bunch of gibberish going over your head, and none of these words make any sense because they're not real words. But once you get past that, it's really amazing. And I actually went back and reread like the prologue and a couple of the early chapters just to try to get a grasp, because what happens in the prologue is like the crux of the entire series, so you kind of have to understand it. So I went back and read that just to make sure I understood it. But yeah, world building is amazing. Synopsis is a little hard, but I'll try to explain it. There's essentially 3 main characters: Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar. So Kaladin, he is a slave working in this war camp. He's basically has to carry bridges because the landscape is like all these big chasms that split up different like plateaus. And in order to cross over the different plateaus, for the soldiers to like go to war, they have to put down bridges. And if they keep the bridges down, then the enemies can come across. So they have these bridge runners, which Kaladin is one of, and they charge up to the front and put down bridges for the soldiers to get across. And because you're at the front lines and you're carrying important things, the enemies are shooting at them the whole time, and bridgemen die super easily. Kaladin's story is about him trying to survive this and keep hope alive kind of situation. And it is a lot of his backstory. He used to be a surgeon and he used to be a soldier, and kind of how he's dealing with the situation. The other character is Shallan. She has a bigger part in the future books, or at least the book I'm reading now, but she is in here. She is this daughter of a local king that was in like crippling debt and didn't have any money, and her father died, which left her kingdom in shambles. So she's trying to get money in order to keep her family afloat. She's really intelligent and she's super creative and clever, and she's like a really good drawer. And there's a bunch of illustrations in this copy of the book, and a lot of them were done by her character. They're like in character drawings. This is like a diagram of one of the animals that's in the world, and it was drawn in character by Shallan. So I just think that's really cool. Shallan is just she's so witty and snarky, and she has so much personality, and I absolutely love her. And then the last character is Dalinar. He's a high prince, which is basically the second highest you can be other than a king. So he's kind of like a regional king underneath the nation's king, and he's trying to save his country because he believes it's making all the wrong choices and it's dividing itself up, and he wants to try to unify it. His country's been at war for 6 years, and none of the other high princes want to work with the king or with each other to try to end this war, and it's been going on forever, and everyone kind of sees it as like a sport rather than like an actual war. So he's trying to figure out how to end the war, and he's just really, I don't want to spoil anything, so his story's a little harder to tell without spoiling stuff, but he's just very dedicated to his cause, and he's very cool as well. All the characters just make decisions that make sense for the most part. And even if it's not a decision I would make, it's one that seems believable for that character. And all of their achievements feel earned. Like, I never feel like something just happened because the plot needed it to happen. Like, everything felt like the characters absolutely deserved it. It wasn't just luck or like some magic bullshit. There's so much I love about these books. I know they're big and scary, and there's a lot of them, but I really recommend it if you like high fantasy, because it's great. I gave it 5 stars. Not quite a 6-star read. I have a feeling the book I'm reading now will be a 6-star read, but yeah, very good. The last book I read was A Study in Drowning. I read it on my Kindle. It's a YA fantasy mystery kind of dark academia style book. The vibes are absolutely immaculate. That's what this book is. This book is pure vibes, and I loved every second of it. So it follows Effie, who is this architecture student who's obsessed with this author that recently died, and the family of the author put on this competition to redo his house, and Effie's plan wins. So she gets sent out to redesign this author's house to find that the house is completely in shambles. It's like falling off of a cliffside, it's moldy, there's like a leaky roof, it's like absolutely disgusting. And while she's there, she meets Preston, who is a literature student from her college, who is looking into the author's life and thinks that something is going on here that isn't exactly what it seems. Preston is the best book boyfriend. I probably like him more than Lo. He's basically a book husband. We love Preston. He's intelligent and he respects boundaries, and he's so caring and he's so sweet, and we love him. So basically Preston and Effie work together to try to solve the mystery of this house and of the author, and there's like fairies going on here, and there's a lot of interesting stuff. This book is just all about the setting. It's creepy, dark academia. Like, I was perfectly in that setting with like the clouds and the cliffside and the ocean washing up on the cliffs, and it was absolutely amazing. It was spooky too. Like, there was multiple times I was like, ooh, giving me shivers. I would check trigger warnings. There's definitely some dark themes going on, especially just Ava Reed's books in general. I would be careful with trigger warnings from what I've heard, but it was really, really good. I gave it 4 stars. So that was all the books. I think I was at 12. Maybe I should count. Yeah, 12 books. I probably won't read quite that many this month. I definitely slowed down towards the end reading like the big Stormlight books, and with like midterms coming up, and this month maybe won't be as bad, but there's a lot just school stuff going on. I really liked a lot of the books I read. This was a great month. There was like a ton of 5- and 4-star reads. Hopefully I can follow it up with something that seems just as good with the Stormlight Archive books and whatever else I decide reading. I have like a huge TBR. I went on like a book haul recently and got like a ton of books, so I'll show a picture here of like my bookshelf. It has a ton of books on it, so I'm excited to get to those once I finish Stormlight. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope this was interesting. Hopefully it's not too long. I feel like I talked for a long time. What time is it? Ooh, I did talk for a long time. So hopefully it's not too long. But yeah, thanks for watching.